Good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for the slight delay. My laptop suddenly decided that it needed to update Zoom, otherwise it wouldn't run. So I'm just catching up on that. If someone on the chat could just confirm that they can see my screen okay and hear me, that would be great.
Can see and hear.
Brilliant. So just give me a second to just get my mojo back together. Nothing worse than at 2 minutes to 2, suddenly your computer saying, sorry, you need to upgrade you to run Zoom. Right. Super. Apologies for the delay. I think we're about ready to go. Okay, slightly belatedly, welcome to the Symology Street Manager Integration Progress and Update Catch-Up Session 6. The time is flying by, especially in the sunshine and nice weather we're having. So what are we going to be doing today? Well, we're going to be looking just the usual sort of agenda, not going to mention coronavirus at all, apart from just then, the release schedule, the release status, a few issues arising, and then next steps from ourselves and the DFT, and we'll finish with the Q&A. So 21st of May, as advertised, we provided the test system early release for a few managed service customers and on Symposium. So effectively that's all old hat now, because that's done and dusted and now replaced by the new full test system release that was made available yesterday on Symposium for locally hosted customers, and managed service systems are being upgraded as we speak at the moment from sort of yesterday lunchtime onwards over the next couple of days. So that will be available for you for business process testing. Just worth noting for anyone locally hosted that there is a new version of the Client Connection Manager. That's the thing that's with the name of Sim Streetworks Connection Manager Service .exe. That in the README, it doesn't say anything about upgrading it. Your account manager may have already been in touch about it, but it does need upgrading for full compatibility. You need that to get the road restrictions download. So new programs, new Client Connection Manager for locally hosted people. For those on the managed service, we've done both things for you, or are doing it at the moment. And then later in the month, on the 22nd of June, we make available the live release for locally hosted customers, and we'll be upgrading the managed service systems on the 27th and 28th of June that weekend. And then I used the biggest font I could squeeze on the screen and the brightest color to say this version must be used for live operation. Can't repeat that enough. If you use an older version, even just the test release, things won't work. And the further you go back, the more things won't work. So it is really important you get onto that release. And if you are in the early days, Street Manager in early July, you start hitting problems. If you're not on that latest release, there's not going to be a lot the support team can do other than say, you need to get on the latest release for us to diagnose the issue or the problem. So it's really important. Following that, then we've got the Street Manager go live overnight on the 30th of June, as before. 2 tasks to do: update all your ODs to the Street Manager Code of Practice, which has already been done on the test systems, and turn on NBatch SI so you start picking up transactions from Street Manager. Again, we'll do that for you on the local, for managed service customers. For locally hosted customers, you need to run that yourself, but it's not too onerous. One wide program and turning on a scheduled process, and just generally checking that things are coming in that evening before you go to bed. Moving on, that release schedule there, that sort of 30th of June, there is one just issue there of when we pick up transactions from Street Manager. So we'll start importing them into Insight on the 30th of June in the evening, but the Connection Manager can pick up transactions historically going back a little while. That really depends on whether any major works promoter is going to go live significantly prior to the 1st of July, or even significantly prior to the 30th of June that evening. So we'll probably start picking transactions up from the 30th of June onwards. But if anyone knows of anyone going earlier, we might need to move that back. So please let us know. Doesn't really matter about highways authority works promoters because they're only operating in that HA area, but any big promoters going earlier, then we'll need to set the clock back in our connection manager to do that. Otherwise, we'll do it from the 30th of June onwards. There's the diagram from last time. I won't go through all the animation that we did last time, but just to confirm we're June the 2nd now, so managed service upgrades are taking place as we speak. If you're locally hosted, you should already have done your upgrade or be trying to do that round about now, which then leaves us time for testing. And we'll still be in that testing period probably when we have the next webinar. So we're green for go, we're green for testing at the moment. The Street Manager release schedule hasn't changed, so we still have those 2 releases, Sprint 5 and Sprint 6, just before and just after go live. We've asked Street Manager or the DFT to do as little as possible. Hopefully they'll take that on board. They didn't do much in the 28th release. There's not a lot of significant changes. Some of you may have spotted on Slack or may have experienced it. Did manage one change, managed to break sending attachments. So luckily that only applies for organizations with an SWA code less than 1,000. So for our user base, that's TFL, Cumbria, Central Beds and Bedford. Basically it's a text to numeric conversion issue at their end. We're waiting for a date for that to be fixed. I'm expecting it to be fixed this week, but can't be sure. It's an awkward one way because we did a connection manager update on Monday and we could have put a hotfix in for it, but the way the DFT have changed it, not intentionally, it's not on purpose at all, means that if we put our change in to fix it, we would have to roll that back out when they fixed it. So if we did the change, then it would break all over again when they put their fix in. So at the moment, we're just going to hold out until hopefully later this week that gets fixed. If it gets pushed back a sprint or 2, we may have to put a temporary change in there for that. But that just mean at the moment, you won't be able to put any attachments on any transaction, and it will of course cause the whole transaction to fail. So if you're one of those highway authorities, just any inspections, FPNs, don't attach anything to it at the moment. Then at the last webinar, I mentioned the concept of a user performance test. We now have a provisional date for that. That's the 11th of June, next Thursday at 2 o'clock. That is still to be confirmed. We've got a bit more testing to do at the end of the week just to check we are ready. So we will post on Slack at the end of this week or early next week that's a go ahead. So we've already performed system performance tests with the DFT. We've got test suites that call our connection manager and call their API and fire through sort of significant volumes of transaction, and that's all worked really well. What we haven't been able to do is, from a user interface perspective, get hundreds of people logging in at the same time, firing through transactions to see if there are any other bottlenecks in the integration at all. And that's what we'd like you to do. So if possible, if you can find the time available, we need you and your colleagues to log in and perhaps do 15 to 20 minutes of intensive Streetworks Street Manager integration usage, so between sort of 2 and 2:20 next Thursday, to try and just give it a bit of a hammer. So for highway authorities, that really means recording things like defective apparatus, because you can send them, you don't need any prerequisites set up for that. If you have some Street Manager works in your test system already, then recording inspections, FPNs, comments. And if you have permits at the right stage, you can always record permit responses if they're available. For works promoters, you're less reliant on other organizations, so you can just create works, update works, start and stop them, record comments. You can record reinstatements and registrations if you like, but they take a bit longer. So the important thing is perhaps to keep to simple transactions that you can record quite a lot of quite quickly, rather than sort of long, complicated ones that are going to take 5 minutes to do and to plot things on the map. Before the test, it's worth checking that your credentials and access is all okay. You can log in, you can sort of create a works on the work stream you want to use, or you've got some works around already that you can progress or respond to. And the idea is to stick to the happy path. You're not trying to break it. You can try and break it any other time, but not then. You don't need to try and do complicated scenarios. You can do them today, tomorrow, next week, the week after. You also don't need to buddy up and respond to each other's transactions, just fire transactions across yourself. You're just trying to give it a real world performance test. So it's more fire and forget, lots of transactions. We're after quantity, not quality. There's nothing actually we're expecting to go along. There's nothing we're particularly sort of trying to test. It's just a diligence thing, a risk thing of just let's just give it a go and make sure, because at the moment on Sandbox, there's not a huge number of transactions going around. We have got the connection manager polling Street Manager for every minute for every site. So it's doing the full production level of calls. It's just not getting back as many transactions as it would expect. And likewise, when sending, we're sending through sort of dozens a day rather than hundreds. So it'd be nice to give it a real test and give us some confidence in that area. If you are able to participate, it'd be nice if you could drop your account manager a line just to let them know how, if you're able to, and how many people will be involved from your end, so we can just get an idea of numbers. Obviously, the more that take part in the first one, the less there'll be a need for a second test. So there's the incentive for us all. But if we don't get much response, we might start chivvying and phoning around a few people to see if they can chip in. You don't really need to check the logs afterwards. You don't need to check the success of your transactions. Obviously, if things break, tell us, but you don't need to check it's got to the other end. We'll do that. We'll check that it's sort of anything weird that's come up and check that everything's got through. The test is primarily for managed service users, because we're checking sort of the connection to the connection manager from one point where the biggest or sort of the main bottleneck is. If you are locally hosted, you are more than welcome to take part at the same time and get your own confidence in your own infrastructure when you know the connection manager at our end in Azure is also busy, and if there's any delays or something, you've got an idea of what's going on. But primarily we're after managed service users, a good mix of HAs and works promoters. So it'd be really helpful if you could help in that next week. I've already posted on Slack just an outage to the sort of the test system integration with the DFT Sandbox next Monday afternoon from 2 p.m. onwards. We're basically doing some BCP testing. We're going to try and take out some components and check things fail over to the correct sites and check our business processes for that. So this will affect both managed service and locally hosted customers, because it's the connection manager that's hosted in Azure that's being taken out. It only affects Street Manager integration though, so you can use your test systems for other things. In reality, you could probably use your system for a bit of Street Manager integration. It's not going to be gone for the whole afternoon, but you may get intermittent results. You may wait a while for transactions. You may not be able to send transactions when you want to. So feel free to dip in, but if you've got any planned testing, please don't plan it for that afternoon. Otherwise, with the 1st of June release, we've updated the release status document, and that represents sort of our spear in the ground for this test release. That document covers some known issues with Street Manager, things that are out of scope for Street Manager, things that are out of scope for our integration. And effectively, that's the last version of that document I'll probably be producing, because I think it's now going to be superseded by other things. The scope information will be in the interfacing concepts document. All of the Street Manager sort of existing issues with the DFT software will be in our troubleshooting document, an FAQ. And any issues that we find in this test release will be handled in the spreadsheet that's being managed on Slack. So that, unless I've made any mistakes, that document should be fairly static, but it's useful there as a spear in the ground. Last time we went through, and that document also mentions features that are not currently in scope, but things we might look at later. I highlighted last time 4 that might actually sneak in before the end of June, sort of 4 that are top of our list for next things to do. Pleased to announce that one of them, only allowing forward plans on major works, has been done. That snuck in before the end of May. So that's to be consistent, to match how Street Manager works in that area. We've also got logins for HS2 now, so we can record works as HS2, and we've been able to go through and look at the works lifecycle, what information they additionally can record. And so we've actually designed the changes there for that side of things. So we can have a look at those now. So if you're an HS2 promoter, you get to record some extra information, whether your works is a highway works or a street works, and whether it's inside the Act limit or outside the Act limit. And if it's a highway works inside the Act limit, there are certain exemptions you can specify. There are also some additional works location areas of parking places, bus stops, cycle hires, and taxi ranks that apply to HS2 works. So the idea with that additional information is that we will download that into the works description. Currently it's not coming down, so we'd quite like to get that in before the end of June so that all the information that's in Street Manager is also down in your HA system. Obviously, this only affects HAs who operate or who have HS2 operating in their area. And so we'll take the description and we'll add some narrative to the end of that with that extra information. So highways work inside or outside the Act limit, any exclusions, consultation dates, and any additional works locations. So they'll appear in the description, so you've got them in Insight without the need to access Street Manager. We talked last time about road restrictions and Section 58s. So that's in the test release. You need the new client connection manager for that. So you can now download road restrictions and Section 58 into your Works Promoter system. I talked last time about how you can narrow down which ones you get from the superset of being the whole of England and the whole of the DFT Street Manager service by using the bounding rectangle on your system options. One thing I didn't mention last time, but is a nice little change we've made, is if you get a road restriction on a USRN which doesn't exist in your system, it will of course get rejected because there's no USRN to record it on. But that would probably have clogged up your view batch interface with lots of road restrictions that are in your bounding box but not on any streets you're interested in. So what we've changed it to is it will just quietly reject those, and so it will reject it, but it won't go into the batch interface. So you're not having to look at sort of dozens of rejections on a weekly basis relating to works outside your area. They are audited though, and the log file is output to the list file area, a date stamped log with any road restrictions that have been rejected because of a USRN not on file. So you can monitor that log just to check that Section 58s are coming in, but are just being rejected for good reasons rather than bad reasons. That logic doesn't apply to cancelled restrictions. When we download a cancelled works, we don't know what USRN it's on, so they're going to come in and appear on your batch interface screen and possibly get rejected because the original road restriction doesn't exist. So that'll clog things up a bit, but there shouldn't be many cancelled restrictions over time. Not many people will be doing that. And there may be an initial burst on Sandbox and people tidying those things up, but they will appear. Don't get too upset if you see lots of cancelled restrictions on there. Worth noting, there is no concept of restriction enforced notices in Street Manager. So you just record a restriction and that's it. It stays there until either it just you cancel it, but there's no end to it really, other than the end date. They just operate between the start and end date. There's no turning them on. There's no turning them off. So we won't send an enforced notice, nor will we receive any enforced notices. And really the main knock-on effect of that is if you have a restrictions map layer, then any Street Manager Section 58s on that map layer will all be at the proposed restriction stage. So if you have color coding difference between proposed restrictions and enforced restrictions, then they will gradually all become proposed restrictions over time as they become all Street Manager ones. Moving on to issues arising, probably one of the biggest issues arising recently was that relating to start and stop notice deadlines, also meaning for immediate works for starts on those. We're having a conversation internally in the office, well, not in the office, but over Teams about the deadlines and what happens. And I was saying, well, it's all working hours. That's what we said we're told in the seminars last year. The working day's not changed; it's all working hours. And someone said, well, okay, what happens at 4 o'clock? What's the end time for the notice if you start at 4 o'clock? I said it's going to be sort of 9:30 the next day, isn't it? And we questioned that and thought, actually, it's not been written down anywhere. Better just check it with the DFT. So posted that to DFT to check, and Looking at the legislation, it says if you record it during the day, it's 2 hours after the start of the works. It doesn't say working hours, doesn't really make it that clear at all. But when raised the question to Paul on Slack, he says if you started at 4, the notice must be in by 6 p.m, which is obviously outside working hours, and a significant change, not just within 2 hours, but within 2 hours outside working hours, just for those ones. Paul at least had the good grace to say it was contrary to his previous understanding. He thought it was going to be working hours only, but obviously the legislation said something quite different. So many of you may not have realised that. We certainly didn't, and made a very hasty change to the software at the end of last week, which is now in the test system release, to change the processing there. We've updated the interfacing concepts document just with a table just to clarify what the deadlines are, which hopefully all make sense and all look okay and what you're expecting, apart from potentially the ones in yellow. Start at 4, the actual start must be done by 6. Start at 4:30, 6:30. It's not until you click over to 16:31 that you can record the start by 10 the next working day. So you should need to be aware of that. We thought perhaps people weren't aware of it. We just asked the DFT. Sally responded to say it's as per the regulations. They've been available since February, and everyone's had a copy of those. So hopefully you read the regulations more carefully than I did, or interpreted them more correctly than I did, and we did. So you were aware of that. But if you are a works promoter, probably want to be aware of. Another thing we've popped up recently, come to our attention, is we've noticed that Street Manager calculates the warranty periods ever so slightly differently. So when adding 6 months, 2 years or 3 years to work out the interim, permanent or permanent extended warranty, Street Manager includes the date of reinstatement in the calculation. So if the permanent reinstatement date was the 1st of April, then the end of the warranty period be the 31st of March next year. Insight currently would have made it the 1st of April next year. We exclude the date of reinstatement. That will mean the dates differ in the Street Manager user interface and in the Insight user interface by 1 day. We don't believe that's actually specified anywhere previously in code of practice and regulations or legislation, and certainly Insight has worked like that for the last sort of 20 plus years. No one's raised any issues on that. And in practice, we don't believe that should have any significant impact. Obviously, it does tell you when the end of warranty period is, but we believe most HAs work on the basis that if they can prove that the defect is as a result of a poor or inadequate reinstatement, then they'd raise a defect against you anyway. So we're going to leave it as it is. It's worth knowing and investigating that currently Street Manager implements 0-dimension sites and non-notifiable sites with a 3-year warranty period. Although we have raised that with them, and that may change, as that didn't seem the most obvious place to use a 3-year warranty period. We've updated as much of the documentation as possible with all the issues arising, implementation and transition documents. The 3 that I think are most important are the ones in the release category. The UI changes, as in things that a user using the system on a day-to-day basis might spot. Interfacing concepts, so the sort of background changes that sort of managers, system administrators need to be aware of, and the troubleshooting, where all the FAQs are put in there and all the sort of current outstanding issues are put in there. They're the 3 really important documents. And if you have any questions with Street Manager integration, really they're the 3 to go to. The answer should be in one of those 3. If it's not, please raise it with us, because we'll try and add it to one of those 3. And that's really important because come 1st July, the support lines are going to be busy. It's going to be a really busy, hectic time for us all as we get used to the new way of working. So the more you can get used to checking those documents first, and the more you can sort of add value into those documents and find these issues and address them there, you'll be helping not only yourself but other people, and therefore, you know, easing the support lines on that 1st of July. And so the troubleshooting FAQs is a really important document to go in and check that you're familiar with a lot of the issues there are and you're happy with the answers. And if you've got questions that are not in there, please shout them across to us, either Slack or pass them via your account manager. As far as what happens if you find issues from the 1st of June onwards, well, there's a new channel as announced last webinar, the June test status channel for publishing a spreadsheet of current issues. You will need to join that test channel to be able to see that though, so you should be able to do that in Slack yourselves. So if you find an issue, check troubleshooting and other documents, check Slack for a similar issue, any news from Symology. So as in next Monday afternoon, then there's going to be outages. The Thursday after that, we're doing performance testing, could affect things. And then check that spreadsheet on Slack. We do have an issue. We spotted something yesterday, something completely new, nothing related to the sort of 1st of June release, where if a promoter raises a PAA, then a PA, then it gets cancelled and they raise a major works again, that's getting rejected when it comes into the HA system. So we'll take a look at that one and I'll cover that off in a little bit more detail just in a moment. So the document's already in use. So if you can't find it in any of those sources, post it on Slack. We'd prefer you not to post on the June test status channel because then that channel will be just nice and clean with just that one document on there, and it'll be really easy to find for everyone and save time fishing around for that. So that's our last bonus issue arising is we've noticed that DFT Street Manager handles PA slightly differently to Insight. And I say Insight rather than Eaton because I think Eaton was very much at the behest of the different permit schemes, and each one could be slightly differently implemented, and Insight took a sort of a broad approach to handle the sort of the majority case. So in Insight, if you have a PAA which is progressed to a PA and then you cancel it, if you then resurrect it and create a new phase, we generate a new PAA. We treat it as a sort of a starting the cycle all over again. It could be a new street, could be a new anything, new dates. So we start it all over again. In Street Manager, if you raise a PAA, once you press the button that says progress PAA to PA, you are then just on PAs from that point onwards, and you are only ever going to send 10-day follow-up notice. You can't raise another PAA on the same works reference. So it's only PAs from that point onwards, no matter what you do, which is the issue for Insight we've got to resolve. We're expecting another PAA, they can send in a PA. So we'll try and get that resolved before go live. Hopefully people don't tend to cancel sort of granted PAs. You would just, or if they're refused, you would just update it and create another application rather than cancelling it and starting again. In testing that and looking around to see what Street Manager did in detail, we found in Street Manager, you can actually, if you raise a minor PA and then cancel it, you can then raise a major PA on that minor PA, bypassing the need entirely for a major PAA. And we've raised that as an issue with Street Manager because effectively that enables you to raise a 10-day follow-up notice following a minor PA and potentially avoid the PAA charge entirely, which is a little bit naughty. So, and the reason I raised that because it's an issue we found where we've got a fix to make, they've perhaps got a fix to make, and I think this is very indicative of the thorny issues we're going to get around go live. In the whole process taking place there, raising the PAA worked, got all the way through from promoter to authority, raising the PA worked, the grants or refuse worked, the cancels worked. It was only then that sort of niche boundary case, edge case of cancelling the permit and creating a new one, a new major one on the same reference that caused the issue. And that's where we are at the moment, of fairly niche edge cases. But I think it's indicative of what's going to happen 1st of July. There is going to be a lot of these, not just affecting us, but affecting the whole community, affecting DFT and Street Manager, affecting other people with other system integrations, people with their own works management system integration, and people just using the user interface. That Street Manager has one interpretation only of all of the code of practice legislation and permit schemes, and it is going to sometimes be different to other people's systems, and sometimes different to other people's views of things. So there's going to be a lot of that in July, regardless of whether you're using the API or the user interface, and a lot for the community to take on board. After the 30th of June, if you have any issues, please raise them with the help desk as you would for normal live production software. I asked last time, I didn't get any feedback, but we'll probably take down the Symology Street Manager UAT channel as we'll have finished UAT. If you want us to put up another Slack channel from sort of informal Street Manager integration chats between promoters, hiring authorities and ourselves, let us know and we'll set up another one. If you don't, then we'll let it die a death. Otherwise, home straight now. Just a reminder, 20 working days, 20 sleeps until Street Manager go live, 20 working sleeps. If you haven't already, please set up your API details across Sandbox and production. I think the account managers are giving you reports about your status and where you are and what you've got to do. Please go through that with a fine-tooth comb. July the 1st is too late to resolve these issues. And if you are a statutory undertaker or a higher authority and contractors, whether they're Symology contractors or other people in the community are asking you to be added, asking you to add them as a contractor, please do that at your earliest opportunity, because they then need to set up their work stream permissions and they need better work for you as well. So there is a lot of people still not with 100% set up across all organizations. And on top of all the thorny issues, what we don't want is credential issues holding people up and not being able to record works on day one in production. Obviously, keep your testing. Everything you feed through is just making the product quality better and better, and hopefully identifying as much of those thorny issues as possible before go live. But we only have 20 working days now before go live, even less to the final release, June the 22nd. So anything you find today, the clock is ticking for us to be able to address that in time for that release. Otherwise, just a DFT next steps. One thing they told us at the last Teams meeting we had with them, they have a plan after go live, and I'm hoping not too soon after go live, so late July, even August, to completely replace their sandbox environment. Some of you may be aware they've had some issues with Google questioning security of it because the URL doesn't match certain things. So they want to move it to a proper gov URL. But to do that, it's not just a case of changing the URL. They're going to replace the environment completely. So starting again from scratch, they're going to retain the configuration, the users, the work streams, the API users, but it will lose all existing data, all permits. It will start off blank. There will be a new URL for it. We will obviously update our sandbox to point to their new sandbox, that new URL, and ensure you have ongoing access to test facilities. They have committed to that, and I'm hoping they'll bring up the new sandbox before they turn the old one off. It won't take across passwords and things like that, so we've already asked them a quick way of trying to reset 200+ passwords. So they're working quite closely with us on that. That's really good. One thing to be aware of, though, is when that is done, the new system, their sandbox will be blank. Your test systems will have lots of existing Street Manager work, so any testing you do after that date, you'll have to start up with new works because your existing works won't exist in Street Manager. So you start progressing them or recording inspections on them, they'll get rejected. So start again. Okay, that's just a heads up for the future. Otherwise, we're pretty much done for today. It's really just a chance that no one's really asked many questions at the end, but I always hang around just in case. No one's asked any questions as we've gone along today, so I've got nothing to answer. But if you do want to raise anything, either unmute yourself or just stick something in the chat and I will hang around for a minute or two. If you don't want to hang around, feel free to go. Thank you very much. And we'll probably do the next one in about 2 weeks' time. Thank you all for attending.
Hello, Mike.
Hello, is that Sandy?
Yeah, that's me.
Hello.
You said next Thursday. we need to do some of what sort of a time, or just all
It's
day? Or?
planned for 2 o'clock, but it'll be a really short time window, 2 till about 2:20, 2:15, 2:20. So 15, 20 minutes of do as much as you can in that burst. I will post on Slack confirmation of that at the end of the week or beginning of next week. And yeah, just if you go in there and just record loads of defective apparatus, or if you've got any existing works you've received from promoters, doesn't matter who it is, just record inspections, or even promote your own works and just fire something through.
Test system. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just go through a few other questions that are coming in today. Someone's asked about the session slides. The slides and the video of today will be posted on Slack later this afternoon. Question from Bob in Darlington. Will be at test inspections and historic works. Yes, they are in that test release. So if you can find an Eaton works in your test system, you can raise an inspection on it, and you will need to just probably have one setting on there changed on the promoter OD. If you remember back to the seminars, there's a flag that says always send to street manager inspections on historic works. So without that, it will just try and go via Eaton. So I might post something on Slack about that, Bob, just to give you instructions on how you do that, because that's probably not set up on street manager. And I think I've got 3 minutes left. I've got some longer questions. Oh, okay. I've got to read this one. That's the question from Virgin Media about contractor organisations. It's about whether they need to be registered with the DFT, or whether they'll be, as API users, whether they'll be using their own credentials. This is really, the question is whether they are subcontractors or contractors in their own right. If they are using your system and logging onto your Insight Managed Service system, they don't need to be registered with the DFT. You give them logins to your system. But if they are using the Street Manager user interface, or they are using their own system, they're having their own API, and they are doing works completely separately to your Insight system, but on your behalf, they will need to be asking you, saying, can you let me in as a contractor in Street Manager, saying, we are this organisation, please allow access. Phil, if that doesn't clear things up, then perhaps just drop me an email and perhaps we'll catch up on Teams or a phone call. But I think you've just confirmed, yeah, they're using your system. So yeah, they're not contractors. You consider them really to be subcontractors, and they're not separate. Brilliant. Superb. Any more questions? Otherwise, I will stop the meeting. Super. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy the weather and keep safe. Bye now.
Thank you.